Namaste and a very good morning to all of you. My name is Mithun, and in today's presentation, we'll be looking at healthcare analytics in SPSS. Even before I show you some of the interesting analysis that can be done on healthcare data, I would like to take you through the overview of this particular case study. In this data set, I have got 10,000 patients, all of them having suffered a heart attack. It's also popularly called as myocardial infarction. Now, these patients are given different types of drugs. They're all clot-busting drugs, which is given to the patients. What is the benefit of giving this particular drug? There are three major benefits. One is that it helps clear the patient's arteries before surgery. Second, the surgery proceeds smoothly. Thirdly, because of these drugs, you can expect a shorter recovery period for the patients. So these are some of the benefits of the thrombolytic drugs, or what we popularly refer to as clot-busting drug. In this data set, I have information about those patients who were given three different types of drugs. The first one being altiplase, second retiplase, and the third one being streptokinase. Altiplase and retiplase are the newer and more expensive drugs, while streptokinase is the older and inexpensive drug. We are interested in comparing the performance of altiplase and retiplase with that of streptokinase. We want to see whether the length of stay in the hospital is reduced when a person is administered the new drug as compared to him being administered an older drug like streptokinase. What is the objective behind this study? The regional healthcare system wants to determine whether they are cost effective enough to adopt in place of streptokinase. That is the first objective that we have. Are the new drugs cost effective vis-a-vis the old drug? And the expectation that they have is that if the newer drugs are cost effective, then patients given those drugs should have shorter length of stay in the hospital. Secondly, the shorter length of stay will help to make up for the greater initial cost of the newer drugs. Now, this being the objective, what are some of the techniques that we have used to solve this problem? Majorly, we have done EDA. We have used line chart to compare the performance of various drugs. We have used a non-parametric test, namely one-way Anova. One of the prerequisites of using the Anova is normality test. Normality test is very important. However, Anova is robust to the violation of normality, and hence we do not explicitly check whether the data is normal. Secondly, homogeneity of variance assumption is very important and is one of the prerequisites for doing Anova. If this test fails, we cannot rely on the results of Anova. If the homogeneity of variance assumption fails, then don't look at the results of Anova. Instead of Anova, we need to use a statistical test, that is Kruskal Wallis test, which is a non-parametric alternative to one-way Anova. With this, what I will do is I will fire up SPSS and show you how Anova and some of these other tests work on this particular data set. Let me open up SPSS. As you can see in front of you, this is the SPSS screen. I want to pull out the file of 10,000 patients. So when I go to file and click on recently used data, the very first data set that I have is about patients' length of stay in the hospital. So as you can see here, there are 4 variables in this data set. Some of them received altiplase drug. They died before surgery. And the treatment cost was around 5.86. If I scroll down, what is the sample size in this data set? I have got information about 10,000 such patients. I'm mostly interested in the different drug type. As you can see here, altiplase, retiplase, and some of them received streptokinase. What is the length of stay in the hospital? Some of them stayed for 13 days, others stayed for 12 days. And if I scroll down, you can see some of them stayed for a week. There are other important variables like procedure of treatment like CABG and PTCA. I will not be working on this particular variable as of now. Primarily, I'm interested in length of stay in the hospital and clot solving. As you can see here, there are 3 different types of drugs: alteplase, reteplase, and streptokinase. And whenever you want to compare among 3 or more than 3 groups, we use a very, very powerful test, which is called as one-way Anova. To perform Anova, I'll click on Analyze, then choose the 5th option from the top, which is called Compare Means. When you choose Compare Means, there are different tests that are present. I will choose the last option, namely one-way Anova. I have to specify the dependent variable and the factor variable from the list of variables that I have. The very first variable, that is the categorical variable here, clot dissolving drugs, that will be the factor variable. When it comes to the dependent list, I can choose length of stay in the hospital. Now, once you choose this will produce the results of Anova. But as I told, that one of the important assumptions that we need to look at before performing the Anova is homogeneity of variance test. At the top right-hand side, you see the 3rd tab, which is called as the Options tab. Let me click on Options. Once I click on Options, a new dialog box pops up. You can see here, 3rd option from the top, which stands for homogeneity of variance test. This is a prerequisite of Anova, so we have to perform the homogeneity of variance test. And to do the EDA, you can simply click on the means plot. With these selections, we are ready to look at the SPSS output. Let me click on Continue. So this is the scale variable will be the dependent variable, and the variable which has 3 or more categories can be the factor variable. Now, please click on OK. SPSS produces the results of Anova. The very first table is about test of homogeneity of variances. I'll come to this. Second table is the Anova table, and you have the means plot here. You can see here 4 groups in the x-axis, which says none. Then you have the older drug, namely streptokinase. The next variable is reteplase. And the last of the variables that we have, last of the categories that we have is alteplase. In the y-axis, I have the average length of stay in the hospital. Now, when you look at none, these are people who did not receive any drug. On an average, the length of stay in the hospital is 3 days. They did not receive any clot dissolving drug. Let's ignore this for time being. Let's look at streptokinase, reteplase, and alteplase. The average stay in the hospital seems to be the highest for streptokinase. It is almost close to 5 days. So those patients who are given streptokinase, on an average, they take 5 days to recover. What about reteplase? You don't see a big difference. Nevertheless, there is some level of difference because those patients who receive reteplase recover by around 4.5 days. The same is true for the next new drug, which is alteplase. Those patients who are given alteplase again recover by 4.5 days. So my first impression when you look at this graph is, when it comes to new drugs like reteplase and alteplase, definitely the length of stay in the hospital is lesser as compared to the older drug, namely streptokinase. However, it is not a big difference. That is the first impression. Now, is this difference real difference, or has this happened by chance? To answer this question, we can look at the Anova table. But even before we look at the Anova, we have to respect the assumption of Anova, which is about testing the homogeneity of variances. When you look for the homogeneity of the variances based on mean, we can look at a test which is called as Levenes statistic. The Levenes statistic number is reported here. The degrees of freedom is also reported here. I'm mainly interested in the p-value. The p-value that is displayed here is 0.000, which is less than 0.05. And since the p-value is very, very small, we can go ahead and reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the homogeneity of variance assumption fails here. The homogeneity of variance assumption is not satisfied. Why do I say this? Because the probability value is smaller than 0.05. And since the probability value is smaller than 0.05, we fail to accept the null hypothesis. Right? So since we fail to accept the null hypothesis, we are going by the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis is that the homogeneity of variances is different for each of these drugs. Now, since the homogeneity of variance assumption itself fails here, there is no point looking at the Anova table. The results of Anova become redundant because the prerequisite for Anova itself fails. Now, the question is, how do I compare the averages? Anova cannot be looked at. Is there an alternative? Now, this is where what comes to our rescue is a non-parametric test by the name of Kruskal Wallis test. Kruskal Wallis test is a non-parametric alternative to Anova. You can use the Kruskal Wallis test when you have 3 or more than 3 groups. And one of the advantages here is that we don't make any assumptions about the distributions of the data. Non-parametric tests are primarily used when the sample size is less, when the dependent variable is ordinal in nature, or if the data violates normality assumptions and some of the other important assumptions that are necessary while you do the parametric test. How do we perform the non-parametric test? To answer this question, let me go to the data editor window. These are my variables. I'll click on the analyze menu. And as I scroll down, you can see here non-parametric tests. The second option interests me, that is independent samples. Please click on independent samples. It just gives you some of the initial level description, like what you want to do. Do you want to automatically compare the distributions across the groups? You can choose this. You can compare the medians, or you can customize the analysis. Let me choose the options fields and specify the fields which I want to enter here. Now, in the test field, what I will do is I will choose length of stay in the hospital and clot dissolving drugs will be pushed as the grouping variable. I repeat, length of stay in the hospital will be the test field and clot dissolving variable will be the grouping variable. I will choose settings. Here, you can go by the automatic option or you can customize the tests. I will choose the customized tests and click on Kruskal Wallis one-way analysis of variance. By default, it will also produce the multiple comparisons. We can do the post hoc tests under the Kruskal Wallis test. With these selections, remember, I've gone to fields, the scale variable I've taken along the test, and the grouping variable is the drug type. And under settings, basically, I've chosen Kruskal Wallis test. And now let me click on run. One of the advantages of using SPSS here is that it's very helpful. It states the null hypothesis under the Kruskal Wallis test. What is the null hypothesis here? The null hypothesis here is the distribution of length of stay is the same across the different categories of clot solving drugs. The average length of stay is the same for the different clot dissolving drugs. The test that we have used here is Kruskal Wallis test, and the significance level that we are getting is 0.000, which is less than 0.05. And therefore, what is our decision? The decision is that we go ahead and reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the average length of stay is not the same. We reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the average length of stay is not the same for the different patients who have consumed these 3 drugs. Now, It gives a detailed explanation about what is the sample size, what is the test statistic, what is the degrees of freedom, and what is the significance level for Kruskal Wallis test. It also shows you the box plot. Here, when you look at the box plot, there does not seem to be too much of a difference when you look at streptokinase, retiplase, and alteplase, because the average length of stay is almost 5 days. Now, this is very important because this table allows me to do a pairwise comparisons of the clot dissolving drugs. Now, to do a pairwise comparison of the clot dissolving drugs, let's look at some of the pairs that we are comparing. The no drug, when we say none and retiplase, none refers to those patients who did not receive any drug at all. Now, we are comparing those patients who did not receive any drug with those patients who received retiplase. We can look at the test statistic, and the asymptotic significance level here is 0.000, which is less than 0.05, indicating that giving a drug is better than not giving a drug. There is a significant difference between those people who received a drug and those people who did not receive a drug. So the same thing is applicable even for alteplase, because when you compare none with alteplase, you're getting a significance level of 0.000, which is less than 0.05, indicating that alteplase, when you compare those patients with those patients who have taken alteplase with that of those patients who have not taken alteplase, there is a significant difference. The same goes for those patients who have been given streptokinase and those patients who have not been given any drug at all. The significance level is 0.000, which is less than 0.05, indicating that irrespective of what drug, whether it is alteplase, retiplase, or streptokinase, there seems to be a difference between those people who have not been given any drug and those people who have been given a drug. But more than the first three comparisons, when you look at the last three comparisons, because we are here to compare whether the new drug is better as compared to the old drug. We are comparing the performance of the new versus the old. Let's compare the performance between the two new drugs, retiplase and alteplase. When you look at the difference, it says that the p-value is bigger than 0.05, and therefore we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that on an average, the length of stay in the hospital is the same, whether you're given retiplase or alteplase. Let's look at another set of comparison, retiplase versus streptokinase. Again, here we are comparing the new drug retiplase with the old drug streptokinase. There is no difference because 0.09 is bigger than 0.05. Therefore, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that retiplase and streptokinase, on an average, the length of the stay in the hospital is the same. Finally, what we see here is alteplase versus streptokinase. Alteplase versus streptokinase. Here, when you compare the new drug alteplase with streptokinase, the significance level that you're getting is 0.521, which is bigger than 0.05. Hence, we can go ahead and conclude that when you compare alteplase with streptokinase, again, there is no difference between the new drug and the old drug. So one of the conclusions that we can derive is that new drug versus old drug, we don't see a significant difference. Then the question here is, why did we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a significant difference? That is because when we look at this particular category, that is the none category, the average length of stay in the hospital is a lot lesser when you have not been given any drug. This could be because the patients have experienced death. So what I'll do now at this stage after post-hoc test is, I would like to rerun the analysis after eliminating this particular box plot, because our original goal was not to compare the old drug with that of the new drug. Our goal was to compare, my apologies, our original goal was to compare the old drug with respect to the new drug. Our goal was not to compare drug versus no drug, right? So since our goal is to compare whether the new drug is more effective or less effective as compared to the new drug, therefore, we can rerun this entire analysis. How do we rerun this entire analysis? The way to rerun this entire analysis is, let me look at clot solving drug. I'll go to variable view. And when you look at the clot solving drug here, the value labels, you can see here, death on arrival and 0 stands for no. I have to limit my analysis to 1, 2, and 3. I don't want to be looking at -1, 0. I have to confine the analysis to 1, 2, and 3. So if you want to confine your analysis only to 1, 2, and 3, what we can do is click on Analyze, go to Non-Parametric Test. Here, you can choose Legacy Dialogues. And one of the options here is K independent samples. Remember, we have got more than 3 groups. Sorry, we have got 3 groups, and therefore we can choose K independent samples. The test variable here is length of stay. And when it comes to clot dissolving drugs, what I'll do is I'll push this variable in the grouping list. Defined range, I will choose 1 up to 3. Here, I will be comparing just the 3 drugs, streptokinase, altiplase, and retiplase. This will give me a fair picture as to what is the performance of the new drugs with respect to the old drugs. Let me click on continue and then say OK. Before clicking on OK, let me draw your attention to some of these other tests, like the median test or the John Kerry test as well. Any of these tests can be used under the non-parametric. I'm choosing the Kruskal Wallis H test. Let me click on OK. The moment you click on OK, the new results here are shown. And as you can see here, the new result, the mean rank for streptokinase is 1664. The mean rank for retiplase is 1483. The mean rank for altiplase is 1520. So when you want to compare among these 3 groups, you can look at the Kruskal Wallis H test, the corresponding degrees of freedom, and the significance level here. When you look at the significance level here, 0.009. 0.009 is definitely less than 0.05, and therefore you can go ahead and reject your null hypothesis and conclude that there is, statistically speaking, a significant difference among the different drugs for length of stay. So when we looked at the means plot here, my p-value says that the average length of stay is different for streptokinase versus retiplase versus altiplase. So this is one of the conclusions that I can draw when I look at the non-parametric test. So with this, I've come to the end of today's presentation. In today's presentation, we looked at one of the prerequisites for Anova, that is homogeneity of variance assumption. If homogeneity of variance assumption is satisfied, please look at Anova. If the homogeneity of variance assumption fails, then we have to ignore Anova and look at a non-parametric alternative. We looked at Kruskal Wallis test, which is a non-parametric alternative of one-way Anova. We also looked at the post hoc tests for the different drugs. And based on the Kruskal Wallis test, by looking at the p-value, we can conclude that there is a significant difference in the length of stay in the hospital for the different kinds of drugs. Now, as you look at this, the mean rank is the highest for streptokinase, which is 1664. It is the lowest for retiplase. Out of the 3 drugs, retiplase seems to be the best out of the 3 drugs because the mean rank is the least. And the next best drug is altiplase. And streptokinase, when you use streptokinase, the average length of stay in the hospital is a lot higher as compared to the new drugs. With this, I've come to the end of today's presentation. I thank you very much for watching today's presentation. I also request you to subscribe to my channel and share my video with your friends. Please also click on the like button. Thank you very much. Have a good day.